What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. So I want to talk about the stimulus and how this affected our economy. Now, this is a good news story, and I'm going to play the clip. It's going to be economic advisor to the White House, Jared Bernstein. Mr. Bernstein is going to be talking about the stimulus that we received last year, as well as the first part of this year. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first off, you guys can do me a favor. Please hit the like button. It does help with the YouTube algorithm. Also, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that little bell notification. That way you'll get notified anytime we put out a video. Okay, and like always, I just wanted to remind you, if you see my name and my picture in the comment section, make sure you see a check mark next to my name. If you do not see that check mark, it's not me. It's someone that's trying to impersonate me. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this clip. Here we go.
Jared, good to see you. Thanks for being with us tonight. These few $1 trillion, roughly $5, depending on how you measure it, lifted 20 million people out of poverty, a little under half of all the people who were living in poverty in the United States. How do you think about this sustainably? How do you think about the idea that giving this money directly to people who needed it the most created such a monumental change?
Great question, and thank you so much for highlighting these important accomplishments at the hands of the American Rescue Plan by not just getting checks in pockets, which is partly what you're talking about, partly, but also shots in arms. So important to getting folks back re-engaged with commerce. And I say that having listened to the last segment, so obviously we are not out of those woods yet. But the combination, the president always viewed this as a dual health economic crisis. Look, I think the thing that we learn is essentially twofold. One is that the government has a tremendously important and deeply curative role to play when the economy hits a shock, a market failure, a recession, or a pandemic-induced downturn of the magnitude that you were showing from those headlines. That role, and the American Rescue Plan, of course, is the most recent and I think the most important vintage intervention, not only reduced poverty, but it helped get GDP back to pre-pandemic levels about a year before people thought it would. It helped pull forward a robust recovery. We're heading back to a full employment economy much sooner than people thought. That's one role. But the second role is to lay the groundwork to build back better, to make sure that we have the policies in place, everything from the infrastructure plan in the bipartisan agreement to the child and elder and educational interventions, to make sure that we don't just get back to where we were, but that we have a chance to do better than that.
But Jared, over the last year and a half, we've talked on many occasions about the degree to which we twisted ourselves into pretzels to discuss this $5 trillion. Congress didn't have nearly the problem in cutting taxes for people a few years ago, particularly people at the higher end of the income scale and corporations. We really are very, very resistant to the idea of giving poor people or people who are living in some degree of poverty money. It is still in the ether as an irresponsible thing to do with which they will do irresponsible things.
And that's interesting. The interviewer here is raising that question, and we did hear that when stimulus checks start going out. What's the first thing that you heard from some people? Oh, they're going to buy big screen TVs and this and that instead of using the money to pay rent and using the money for utilities. We heard that stuff come out when it came to stimulus checks going out to a large group of people, or some people had problems with them saving the money, and you heard politicians talking about this whole thing. And when it comes to saving money, even if you're rich or poor, if you're saving money, especially during the time that we were in, we didn't know what was going to happen next month or the month after that. So it makes sense, if you have extra money, you want to save that money because you might not have a job in a couple of months, or you might have needed that money for an emergency in the near future. So people didn't know. So you spent money if you had to spend it, but if you didn't have to spend it, even if you were poor, you were still trying to hold on to that money. And so that is a good question, or a good question that he posed there, as far as, rich and poor. If we're giving money to poor people, we're assuming that poor people are not going to manage that money correctly. So let's hear what Mr. Bernstein has to say about that.
This is a very serious public policy misunderstanding. Somehow we've created a mythology that if you give rich people money, good things happen, but if you give poor people money, bad things happen. Neither of those are true. And in fact, the poverty reduction impacts that you just showed are so important, not just for 2021, but there is really high quality research that says if you take a kid who's poor and you provide her with the resources so that she can go to school in a more healthy manner. By the way, if you take the lead out of the pipes, which is a critical part of the bipartisan plan, if you provide people with the income they need to eat nutritionally, not only will that kid eat today, that's not just a consumption investment, it is a long-term investment in that child's life. And she will get a higher education, she will have higher earnings, she will cost society less in the long run. So we shouldn't just think of these as helping someone today. We should think of them as long-run investments. And yes, you're making a really important point. There is a tremendous amount of economics and public policy and just kind of ethical, social, political practices that we should be learning from what's been happening here. And, woe betide us if we don't, but I can tell you that President Biden is very invested in learning those lessons.
So here's the thing. We spent all this money and we're now seeing the results of it, but it lifted about half of Americans who were in poverty out of poverty. That means there's still a little more than 20 million people who are still in poverty despite those relief packages. Why doesn't that work? Why didn't this work for them? And what do we do about that? Are we going to do another $5 trillion to target the least among us?
I do think it's very important to keep these measures going where they're appropriate. And obviously, you don't need unemployment insurance if you're at full employment. We're not there yet, to be clear. But unemployment insurance is just that. It's insurance against high unemployment. But a child tax credit, I mean, the reconciliation plan, of course, plans to try to extend that measure for numerous years in order to keep tapping those kinds of poverty-reducing benefits. Look, but at the end of the day, and this is, again, where the conservative mythology is completely backwards. Low-income people don't just need to work, by the way. Food stamps and Medicaid, they don't keep your family alive and housed. But low-income families don't just need to work, they want to work. They want to be productive. And we have tons of research that shows that these so-called labor supply discouragement effects barely show up at all in the data. So we have to not just keep some of these work supports going, we also have to get the macro economy working on our behalf. And that's where some of these rescue plan and the GDP report from today are so important. We are pulling forward a recovery that forecasters told us was 2-3 years out there. Because of the measures in the rescue plan, we're pulling that recovery forward. Because of the Building Back Better plan, we're going to make sure that we don't just pull the recovery forward, but that it is the most inclusive recovery, and that if you play a role in helping this economy grow, you're going to get a fair share of that growth.
So that was Mr. Bernstein. Now, you saw at the very end, he was talking about unemployment, and he was also talking about the child tax credit. He did not mention stimulus checks or direct payments, but it's good to see that the stimulus worked. So the stimulus worked, it helped stimulate the economy. And so now that's even more of an argument to move forward with more stimulus in the future. As of right now, we need support. We need support from politicians. We need them to start talking about it. I can't remember the last time I heard any politician talk about stimulus checks. And so that has to happen. And it has to happen fast because the American Families Plan is right around the corner. They're working on the first infrastructure bill right now. Once they get that approved in the Senate, they're going to start addressing the American Families Plan. And then we're going to start hearing proposals come out on the American Families Plan. And so when those proposals start coming out, that's when we need to hear, okay, we want direct payments for the American people. I think the best argument right now is you have that child tax credit. They're already talking about extending the child tax credit. Well, what about the rest of Americans? What do they get? Do they get anything? So that's when that talk needs to happen. But I want to know what you guys think about this. So let me know down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.